Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 4 of the Higher Mind podcast. I am Jocelynn Carver. I'm 21 from northern Minnesota, and I am so excited to be getting into spirituality with you all today. If you are interested in self-improvement, spiritual growth, or if you're just looking to deepen your understanding of the unseen forces that guide the world, then the universe has led you to the correct place. In this podcast, we work to create our best selves through knowledge, awareness, understanding, and action. So let's get better together, shall we?
The Higher Mind.
Disclaimer, I'm not a licensed mental health practitioner or a doctor. Everything in the following video/audio file is information from credible articles, books, or teachings that I've gathered through my therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, or group therapies that I had found helpful to utilize in my life. In today's episode, we will be talking about what spirituality is and where it comes from. I'll be giving you a brief history of spirituality, as well as some spiritual practices that myself and others may use. We'll also be talking about the mind-body problem, and I'll give you my perspective on that as well. Lastly, we'll be talking about why spirituality is important and how it has helped me in my life, and I'll go through my spiritual journey with all of you as well. But before we get into what spirituality is, we have to understand the etymology of it, which is where the word comes from, where the root word spirit comes from. So breaking down spirituality, the word comes from spirit in English, and this is derived from the Latin word spiritus, which comes from the Greek word for pneuma, which means breath, spirit, or soul. And it is also derived from the Hebrew word of ruach, which has a similar definition. So the Latin word of spiritus came from the Greek and Hebrew words, and spiritus means vigor, breath, soul, ghost, or courage. Following this, the old French took that definition and they turned it into spiritus, which is where we now get spirit in English. Now, the definition of spirit varies a little bit, as a lot of people use the word spirit and soul interchangeably, which I can understand, but there is a slight difference between the two. So a spirit is what is believed to animate the body, and this is the force that connects us to a greater good or a higher power, while the soul is basically the essence of a person. So this includes our mind, our emotions, our personalities, or our will. This is what I like to think connects us to others and connects us to ourselves is the soul, while the physical body connects us to our environment. Now, the word spiritual comes from the Latin word of spiritualis, or the Old French word spirituel, which is of course how we came to spiritual, which means concerning the spirits. And moving forward, we have spirituality. And spirituality comes from spiritualitam, which is from the Latin word, which just comes from spiritualis. And with all of that being said, we can now understand where the word spirituality comes from, but defining it is not so easy. Spirituality is a very broad concept of believing in something that is greater than yourself or believing in a higher power. Some people also believe that to be spiritual is to find yourself's purpose or to untangle the mysteries of humanity or the universe as we know it. Traditionally, spirituality was used to reform humans into the original shape of man, as seen through the eyes of God. Since then, spirituality has branched off into innumerable different definitions, as everyone has their own concept of what spirituality is, the way that they practice it, and the way that they view themselves and the world. And there are a number of reasons why different people may start practicing spirituality. It may be for personal growth. It may be to find the ultimate meaning behind life. Some may begin their spiritual journey in search for a greater truth, and some for a religious experience. Some also may want to explore a supernatural realm that has been undocumented thus far. And others may start because they have witnessed or experienced something that they cannot explain and that scientists cannot yet explain, such as a spiritual experience. In modern times, spirituality and religion are often considered separate practices. Religion most often worships and connects the self to a god or gods externally, while spirituality normally looks inwardly to find connection within the self. Along these same lines, religion usually follows a set of rules, rituals, or dogma, whereas spirituality has no rules nor no bounds. It is up to you personally to make that solo venture. And lastly, religion is often a group experience where individuals will often come together with a common faith to worship together. But spirituality, on the other hand, is a solo endeavor, as I had stated, and it is most often brought upon the self and not initiated through the words or teachings of others. But this hasn't always been the case, where they have been treated as separate entities, as we will come to find out. And now I'm going to move on to a brief history of spirituality, where it really comes from. So 400,000 to 40,000 years ago, which I understand is a very broad time frame, there is evidence supporting the fact that Neanderthals actually believed in a spirit or a sense of a higher being than themselves. This comes from evidence that their people were buried in common grounds. They were also buried with grave goods, which indicate the acts of ritual or worship. This could also point to the fact that they may have believed in something greater than themselves or in a human spirit or soul. 32,000 years ago, in what is now northern France and southern Spain, Neanderthal-era humans actually painted depictions of very sophisticated animals in caves. Now, these pictures actually depicted the female fertility cycle as well as depictions of the cosmos. So as far as we know, spirituality began anywhere from 400,000 to 40,000 years ago. If you wish to look further into other spiritual practices that were held further in the past, I absolutely encourage you to do so, because there's a lot of information out there. But I am now going to jump to traditional spiritualities, which were a subdomain of religion. And these included Abrahamic faiths. Judaism, Christianity, Sufism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Indian religion, and African spirituality. But after World War II, spirituality and religion became even further disconnected than they had been before, as this is where human spirituality began taking root from Eastern religions, human psychology, and esoteric traditions, in order to begin the search for the true self. This used tactics such as the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression, self-disclosure, yoga, and meditation. And modern spirituality actually generally takes these same roots. New Age spirituality began in the 70s, which is now considered too broad to define, but this is when the upheaval of spirituality actually began, and this was thought of as a movement. This movement emphasized the belief of the importance of the individual's spiritual journey, and the importance of recognizing that we are all one and that we are all a whole. But now, a study that was conducted in 2005 actually stated that 24% of individuals describe themselves as spiritual but not religious, and this has only increased with time. So spirituality is a very common practice, and it is a very broad practice. And current day spirituality actually revolves around the inner path that will lead one to discover the essence of their own being. It is also used to pinpoint our deepest values, morals, and meanings behind the way that we live, the way that we do as humans. Now, with practicing spirituality, there are a number of different ways to do this. To give you a few examples, we have gratitude, or living in awe, or living in abundance. So this is recognizing that what you have is enough, and that what you have is good, and you are abundantly full of love and life and happiness and peace. You can also practice forgiveness or loving kindness, which can often go hand in hand with each other. You could practice mindfulness or mindfulness meditation. You could chant or use mantras. You could also practice manifestation or the belief of reaching inner spiritual enlightenment. Sometimes people will recite affirmations such as, I am good, or I have this, or I will have that. Those are all affirmations as long as they are positive. You could practice self-healing, which is a form of energy healing, where some people actually practice healing others. In some spiritual practices, people will actually use fasting or deprivation tactics, which can also be described as somatic practices that will diminish the ego or the shadow self. But spiritual practices, in my opinion, are innumerable. You cannot put a number on how many ways people practice their spirituality, because it is a self-guided concept. It is something that feels good to you, feels right to you, something that helps you to grow and to become a better version of yourself. So the ways that I practice spirituality include yoga and meditation. I do a lot of yoga. I do it every single day, and I meditate at least once a day as well. I work to realize what true love and true acceptance actually means, and I try to implement that into my everyday life. And I work to surrender to the moment, as that is really all that we have. We are not promised the future, and the past is the past. So we have to recognize that now is all that we have, and now is good. I have also gone through a lot of inner child work through therapy, and also personally, this is a journey that I am still walking today, and I learn more about myself and the way that I work every single time that I pull out my inner child workbook. I also do a lot of shadow or ego work, and this is very helpful for me. It helps me to break down my ego. Of course, I believe that it is okay to still hold on to a bit of your ego, as we need to be able to set boundaries as humans and to hold on to the connections that we value. I also practice a lot of unconditional love, which uses a lot of loving kindness, and loving kindness is a wonderful technique that you should look into if you haven't. I practice forgiveness and I practice gratitude, so even if I am hurt by somebody, I can still forgive them, and that has helped me so much to improve my self-worth and also to understand that I don't need to hold on to these grudges for the rest of my life, as it is only going to hurt me in the end. It's not going to hurt anyone else. And with gratitude, it has helped me so much to reduce the amount of things that I take for granted in my life. Now I am able to look at everything that I own and recognize its beauty and recognize where it came from and how fortunate I am to have these things. This has also helped me to take care of the things that I have and to make them me. This can be shown in very small things, such as decorating your power outlets. As I'm able to look at that power outlet and realize that maybe that's not how I want my home to look, even if it's just a small part of it, I can make that power outlet, which gives me energy, into something beautiful that I appreciate and that I love. I also practice a lot of self-inquiry, which is questioning who I am, why I'm here, why does anything exist, and what is the point of life? And I follow each of these questions with, how do I know? How do I know the answers to these questions? And these are very important questions to ask yourself as well. And a lot of people may view them as simply existential questions, which they are, but they don't have to be a negative thing. We can absolutely find hope and love and excitement through these questions. And lastly, I am constantly seeking knowledge to further my practice. And I think that a lot of this podcast is going to show that to you, that I'm constantly looking to understand myself and the world around us at a higher level than I do currently. This portrays a growth mindset, and this is what we had talked about in episode 2 that you can find right here. And all of these practices have given me such a great feeling of self-transcendence, which is the belief that there is something greater than ourselves and that there is a force that goes beyond space and time as we know it. And this feeling can come from the awe of holding a newborn and looking at that baby and just feeling as though you are truly in a state of awe, or watching a sunset and truly being there in the present moment. Those are both examples of self-transcendence, and this entire journey has given me so many of those moments I never expected I would be able to have throughout my lifetime. But on the topic of spirituality, I feel as though it is very important to include the mind-body connection, or as some people call it, the mind-body problem. So the mind-body connection is the idea that we are more than just our thoughts, more than just our bodies, or more than just our spirits, that we are all three of those things combined. But here's where the issue comes in. There is a huge gap in the knowledge that we have that connects our minds to our bodies. So when scientists have asked themselves, what makes us us? Is it our body? Is it our thoughts? Is it our mind? Or is it our brain's perception of reality, or our consciousness that has yet to even be defined? There is no one thing that we can all point to and say, there, that is what makes us us. That is what makes me me. It is my mind, or it is the way that my brain creates my reality for me. Or here, it is my physical body living in a physical realm. And this, my friends, is the mind-body problem. For centuries, scientists and philosophers have studied and hypothesized the correlation between the mind and the body. Having never been able to come up with one solid answer, we are left with this mind-body problem. But I had a very hard time understanding what the mind-body connection truly meant, so I'm going to give you a couple of examples. When we hear a joke, our mind or our inner beings find that funny, but it causes a physical reaction to laugh. Or when something is said to us that hurts our feelings, that is a mind reaction or something that is going on internally, but we will also have a physical reaction that comes along with that, such as crying. But what we're all trying to figure out is how those two things are connected and how they possibly could be connected, as one is physical and one is non-physical, being the mind. And with that, there are quite a few different ways that people actually look at this problem. And we can look at the ontology of this to figure those things out. Ontology being the philosophical study of being. So there are two main but very broad opinions on this topic, those being dualism and monism. So in dualism, people often believe that the mind is an independently existing entity, separate from the physical body. That reality is actually composed of both physical and non-physical substances, such as the mind is non-physical while the body is physical. Dualism also holds the idea that our mind cannot yet be explained with physical explanations, such as the way that our brain functions or our brain properties. And this will make more sense once I get into monism, trust me. In the concept of monism, the mind and the body are ontologically indiscernible entities. They believe that the mind and the body are not separate, that they go hand in hand, and that the mind is created by a physical substance such as the brain. Monistic thinkers believe that there is only one reality, either physical substances or non-physical substances. But definitely not both. It has to be one or the other. While dualism, what we had previously discussed, believes that there is a combination of both in the world surrounding us. Monists believe that the mind can actually be explained using physical properties such as the function of the brain or the brain's properties, while dualists believe that, like I had stated previously, they are separate entities and you cannot explain one using the other. Dualists also most often believe that you cannot use modern-day science and modern-day technology to truly understand the difference between the mind and the body. They believe that we are not quite there yet in our research, and in order to figure out this mind-body connection, we would have to form a completely brand new way of looking at things, a new scientific approach that may not even entail science at all. They believe that physics as we know it can't explain it, and there have been many physical anomalies that disprove what humans currently know about physics. But with that being said, we can now talk about physicalists, which are a subcategory of monism. So physicalists actually believe that one day we will be able to reduce the mind properties to physical properties to explain the modern day rift in philosophy and science. This is also called reductionism. And reductionism is exactly how it sounds. They are reducing the idea of there being a separate entity, the mind, and trying to explain that as being a part of our physical substance, which is why they are called physicalists. So overall, they are trying to relate mental phenomena to translate into physics. But the physicalist idea is actually becoming increasingly unpopular as it blatantly disregards mental illness or the lives that we can live in our minds that are not brought on from a biological standpoint or from genetics or from something that has physically happened to us. But this was not always the case. This was the most popular idea in the 20th and 21st centuries. And there are actually quite a few subcategories of physicalism, such as behavioralism. And behavioralism is something that emerged in the early 1900s that was a reaction to depth psychology, which is the scientific study of the unconscious. This assumes that behavior is either a reflex to external stimuli that we receive in our environment, or that the individual's history that can include either punishment or negative reinforcement, paired with the individual's current motivational state and controlling stimuli, is what creates our behavior. There is also type identity theory, which was very popular, and this is a belief that mental events can actually be grouped into types, and that they can be correlated to physical events that are currently happening in the brain. We also have anomalous monism, which is another subcategory of physicalism, which believes that mental events are actually identical to physical events, and that the mental state of things is anomalous. Make that one make sense. And lastly, there is functionalism. And the idea behind functionalism is that each mind or mental state is actually constituted solely by its functional role. So to end this, dualists believe that the mind and the body are connected and that they are two separate entities. And there are a few different beliefs that are subcategorized underneath dualism. But overall, they generally believe that there is life after death, as our consciousness or our spirit can still live without a physical body. While monism, or the subcategories of monism, including behavioralism or physicalism, believe that the mind and the body are one, and that one cannot live without the other. But here's where I'm going to bring up the research concerning consciousness. And research actually shows that consciousness can continue without brain functionality, that surviving after death is the spirit, or the quantum monad, as some people call it. There is a lot of evidence supporting this in people who have went through near-death experiences, or for people who have legally passed away and then come back to life. And with that being said, if you have ever seen a human body that is deceased, I believe that it is very common for people to recognize that that person isn't there anymore, that there is something missing, that that energy is gone. And I think that that says a lot about the differences between dualism and monism and what you believe. Now, I personally lean far towards the dualistic way of thinking. Of course, I don't have answers for whether the universe is made up of both physical and non-physical properties, as some people believe that everything that we are experiencing is completely in our mind and that the physical world is not really here. I personally believe that it is a combination of the two, that we are experiencing reality on a physical plane through a non-physical plane. I also believe that in order to recognize my reality for actual reality, I have to be able to take into account both the physical and the non-physical. And I feel that if you were to conduct research based solely off of physical properties, we wouldn't get very far. And I see that there is a large advancement that is coming and that is currently happening in both philosophy and science right now. And that hopefully within my lifetime, we will be able to understand the mind-body problem and come to a conclusion to recognize if life is just physical, just non-physical, or if it is a combination of both, which is what I personally believe. And while we may not yet have proof that our spirit exists, we are currently living through a major paradigm shift in what we actually consider to be reality. There is new research coming out every single day that contradicts our previously held notions of our human history, or the nature of our consciousness, or who we really are as humans. But as time goes on, I and many, many others truly believe that much more evidence is coming to light that is actually pointing in the direction of there being a spirit that can exist outside of the physical body. Some of this evidence is coming from the Department of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia. Right now, they are actually studying near-death experiences, mediumship, telepathy, and past life experiences, among much more. There has also been research published that states that telepathy is an ongoing phenomena, that there is actually communication happening that is outside of the physical realm as we know it. So we are now understanding that we are able to communicate actively with just our mind or just energy. Another thing to consider is people's personal experiences with psychedelics. I have heard so many stories about people taking LSD, mushrooms, or DMT and experiencing an alternate realm or going through an out-of-body experience. Not only that, but oftentimes when someone comes out of one of these psychedelic experiences, they're going to have an experience that we cannot yet explain, and this usually comes in the form of a spiritual experience. And also, if you look at this year's Nobel Prize winning work, it determined that the universe is actually not locally real, which means in a sense that nothing truly exists until it is observed. And this has a lot to do with the double slit experiment. And if you have time to look into that, I highly encourage you to do so. But overall, this study means that our awareness of the things going on around us means more than just that. It means that we are actually actively changing and shaping our reality as we know it just by observing it. So, with all of this great importance in mind, we're going to move over to the importance of spirituality. So, for some people, spirituality can provide a sense of purpose or a sense of meaning, and it is something that we all actually have, even if you don't see it. Spirituality can also connect you to a force that is greater than yourself or others. It can also provide inspiration, creativity, hopefulness, appreciation, and peace of mind. And it is also important to recognize that collective spiritual thinking is an accumulation of wisdom that has been distilled from billions of people for centuries that have been thinking existentially, such as, what is the point of all of this and who are we really? And studying these ideas can actually help us to get to the bottom of what we personally believe. And looking at that through a bigger picture, we could hopefully understand in the very near future why we are here and who we are and what really makes us us. But even if you don't believe in all the woo-woo-ness that I have been talking about, I am now going to pull up this article from theverywellmind.com. And this is research-based evidence that can prove how spirituality can help you. It can give you better health. It can give you greater psychological well-being, less depression, less hypertension, which is physical, less stress even during difficult times, more positive feelings, and a superior ability to handle stress. With all of that being said, even if you only were to practice meditation throughout your spiritual journey, you're going to have massive positive effects from that. Because meditation actually improves the quality of your breathing, it improves emotional regulation and your emotional response. Meditation also improves your nervous system function. It can decrease tension-related pain. It increases serotonin production in your brain, which is the happy chemical. It lowers high blood pressure, strengthens your immune system and function. It improves your sleep, reduces stress, increases cardiovascular health, and it actually affects our bodies at a cellular level, which enhances our immunity, decreases inflammation, and it quite literally changes our gene expression. Now, I'm not looking to proselytize or try and convert anyone to a belief system that I follow, but there is one more thing that I would like to bring up. I just took a break from recording the podcast to check my phone and check my messages, and I just received a message from a very, very close friend of mine, and I can promise you that I just opened this message, and I think that it will contribute to the validity of my statements. So this very close friend of mine has an uncle who was not doing well at all, and they were actually expecting him to pass away either last night or sometime this morning. He was in the hospital last night, and he went to sleep. And while he was sleeping, he had a dream where he was dying, and then someone came and actually saved him. When he woke up, his oxygen levels were much better, and he was actually able to be put on hospice care and able to return home. He has been improving ever since. So he has now decided that he would like to spend as much time with family and friends as humanly possible. And that story absolutely blew me away. The synchronicity of me talking about what I am currently talking about and him messaging me at that moment and this happening is a lot for me to comprehend right now, but I'm just going to accept it. And all I want to say is, how could his mind have known that his physical body was deteriorating, and how could his mind have known that he would improve through this dream of being saved if our mind and our body weren't connected at some level? I would also like to say that my excitement and that my hope for this friend and for his uncle is not diminished whatsoever by my excitement of the synchronicity that has just occurred. So I will take time to process this, and I encourage you all to take this into account and take it as you will. And ironically, we're actually moving into how spirituality presents itself in my life and what my spiritual experience has been throughout life. And this message that I just received from my friend is something that is actually going to play a part in this story now. I have actually written a layout of my spiritual journey throughout my lifetime just so that I can stay on track. And so I'm going to go through that with you all. So growing up, I actually had a very religious Catholic maternal side, and my paternal side was very open, and we really didn't have any ideas that were enforced upon us. So I'm very, very grateful for that. But growing up, I actually struggled a lot trying to find my own path. I actually had a lot of friends who were very religious, and they were raised in religious households, and it seemed like they had answers for everything, and as though they were comfortable with the idea of life and with death, and they knew what they had to do good in the world and to get where they wanted to go after life on Earth. But I was terrified. I had absolutely no idea what I believed in, and I didn't know how to believe in anything. At certain points throughout my life, I had almost wished that my family had pushed these ideals onto me. But looking back, I'm absolutely glad that they did not do that. I'm very grateful that they hadn't done that, and I would do the same if I were to have children. My paternal side of the family actually gave me the option to decide who I am and why I am here. And so up until age 12, I was actually quite confused. I had conflicting ideas of what life was and what life after death was. At 12, I started to approach life from a more atheist point of view. This was partially due to rebellion from my Christian family members, but it was mostly because I had actually tried to believe these things. I had gone to Sunday school, and I had gone with friends to church, and I had gone to church with my families, and I had read parts of the Bible, and to me personally, I just couldn't make sense of it. That is when I started to think that there was nothing out there, that there was not a greater good. At 13, I actually started to approach life with a more agnostic way of thinking. I don't know what is out there, and I can't tell billions of people who believe in these other religions that they are wrong. It just didn't feel right to me. So I believed that I don't know what there is, so I'm just going to leave it at that, and I'm not going to think too far into it. I kept this agnostic way of thinking until I was around 19 after a large-scale mental battle. I had began lots and lots of therapy, lots of self-work, and I attended group therapies, and I was actually reintroduced to the idea of there being a higher power in my DBT group. I was encouraged to figure out what I believed in as my higher power, as they believed that having a higher power would help me succeed in my road to recovery. And at the time, in all honesty, I believed that religion was somewhat of a safety blanket for those who couldn't accept that there was nothing after death. Because for so long, I had become super comfortable with the idea that once we died, we would go back into nothingness, the same nothingness that we experienced before we were born. And I'm still comfortable with that idea, so if that is what ends up happening, that's what ends up happening. I also believed that they believed in life after death for no reason, no good reason at all, as there was no proof of this anywhere. But I began to look into this on my own, and my views have changed drastically in the last couple of years. In the very beginning of working in this DBT group, I turned to Mother Nature as my higher power, and I absolutely still believe that she holds this force over everything that we have yet to explain. And I also looked back into religion, but in all honesty, I still could not see what other people were seeing in it, and I couldn't connect myself to it in the way that others do. And lastly, I looked into spirituality. I had always heard the term growing up, but I had never truly looked into it on my own, and I don't think that I truly understood it. But as I began to read about people's experiences of dying and then coming back to life, it was almost impossible for me to discredit the fact that there was something after, as almost every single one of these people who had experienced this experienced almost the exact same thing after they had passed. So I looked into that. I read about near-death experiences and how they opened up something in people that they had never experienced yet, somewhat of a spiritual experience. I read about energy and energy transfer, and I've always been into science, math, and physics, and so this was exciting for me to learn about. I practiced mindfulness meditation, yoga, and I journaled profusely. I also worked on my inner children, and I am now currently in EMDR, and every single one of these things that I have looked into have opened my eyes to something new that I had not previously understood or been able to make sense of. I also looked into astral projection, and I read government documents on the validity of ways of communicating through the non-physical, like telepathy. And I also looked into mediumship and empaths and the likes. I read on synchronicity, I read on parallel universes, advanced space travel used by extraterrestrials, which can only be explained by them working with the universe and technology that we do not have yet and that we do not yet know about. and that time is a man-made construct. This also plays into what I had talked about in episode 2 on mindset, where researchers conducted a radical experiment in 1979 that proved that we can quite literally reverse our aging process if in our minds we believe to be a younger version of ourselves or living in past times. I put all of this together, and with that I recognized that I was more of a spiritual being than I had initially thought, and that we all are. And I believe now that we all have a spirit and that life does not end after death, that this is only the beginning of something much greater and much larger than I ever could have imagined. So currently, I do not necessarily believe that there is a god or gods, but I do believe that the universe is greater than me and that it works in ways that we cannot yet understand. And this is my higher power, the higher power that I hold to be higher than myself. I believe that after death we become timeless entities. Where? I don't think that anyone knows, and I'm okay with that. A lot of my spiritual journey has allowed me to become comfortable with the unknown and being okay with not knowing certain things and using acceptance. It has also helped me to live more fully and more intentionally and to use every moment of every single day completely. It's helped me to become more mindful and with that more aware, which has brought up a great deal of synchronicities in my life. Of course, these synchronicities may arise because I am more aware and I am more mindful of everything that is going on around me. But I do believe that heightened awareness from anybody sends this sort of energy into the universe that we can't yet explain, which is then reciprocated back onto themselves. So when you are aware, maybe the universe becomes aware of your awareness and sends you messages to let you know that you are on the right path, that it is good that you are aware because now you're able to pull these things out from what is going on around you that you never would have realized or recognized before. I am also able to look at the bigger picture and to view life as being more than just physical. And it has brought me a sense of self that I never thought that I could have had. I have been able to figure out who I am and why I'm here, what my purpose is, and I feel comfortable with all of those things. It has also brought to me more intentional and better suited connections with other people that I need at certain times in my life. They feel like coincidences, having these certain people coming in at a time of need. But I truly believe that that is how the world works, and we receive what we need when we need it, if you have faith in the universe. And lastly, spirituality has helped me to make sense of the negative in life and to recognize that those too will pass, and that life gets better, and that I will get better, and you will get better. So, with all of that being said, that is going to conclude today's episode on spirituality. I hope that you were able to gain some insight on what spirituality is, where it comes from, what problems have arisen with spirituality, and the potential growth that you may be able to receive if you start or continue on your spiritual journey. Because the journey itself is never ending, and neither are the positive results. If you are watching on YouTube, feel free to check me out on Spotify at the Higher Mind Podcast. And if you're listening on Spotify, feel free to check me out on YouTube at the Higher Mind Podcast as well. If you'd like to have early access to my content and access to exclusive content, as well as join in on a super interesting discussion where we have over 15 different topics, go to www.thehighermind.org, which is my website, where you can become a member today to receive access to all 3 of those things. I will include links in the description for everything below, and as always, take care, my friends, and until next time, thank you.